It's what? It's the 16th. Yeah, isn't it?
Yes.
I was like, ooh, Amanda's trying to trick me. She's trying to gaslight me. Have you heard that term a lot lately? It's actually from an old movie. And my husband asked me the other day, what do they mean by that? So I was having to explain to him. Okay. So Ruth, well, and you might want to have Numbers 25 ready. Okay, so we're in the book of Ruth, chapter 4. And like I said earlier before we went live, which we are now, we are trying to finish up tonight. But if we don't, we don't. Okay? So I'm first going to read through it, and then we're going to go back, and there's other things we need to, there's layers to this. It is really cut straight. I mean, just, like it is, surface. But there is some things we want to make sure that we cover. And then I'm going to share with you a personal struggle I had on some verses, mainly one. And then I just really kept studying, and the Lord showed me it wasn't what I thought, or I agreed with anyway. Yeah. So in chapter 4, here we go. Then went Boaz up to the gate and sat him down there, and behold, the kinsman of whom Boaz spake came by, unto whom he said, Ho, such a one, turn aside, sit down here. And he turned aside and sat down. So this is the kinsman that's closest in family relation. Remember how last week we talked about that law of redemption and the Levirate marriage, those two things we talked about. But the law of redemption, it was supposed to be not like you go to this eighth cousin or something. You go from the nucleus of the family outward, okay? Which also includes females of included daughters. So there we go. But anyway, so this is who he found. He found the near kinsman. Verse 2 is important. It says, And he took the 10 men of the elders of the city and said, Sit ye down. And they sat down. And he said unto the kinsman, Naomi, that is come again out of the country of Moab, selleth a parcel of land, which was our brother Elimelech's. And I thought to advertise to thee, saying, Buy it before the inhabitants and before the elders of my people, before being like in the presence of, not before, after, okay? If thou wilt redeem it, redeem it. But if thou wilt not redeem it, then tell me that I may know. For there is none to redeem it besides thee, and I am after thee. And he said, he being the kinsman, I will redeem it. Then said Boaz, okay. No, he didn't say okay, but what day thou buyest the field of the hand of Naomi, thou must buy it also of Ruth, the Moabitess, whatever, I have a struggle with that. The wife of the dead, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance. And the kinsman said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I mar my own inheritance. Redeem thou my right to thyself, for I cannot redeem it. Now we'll learn some stuff there so we don't be all judgy about this guy about why he wasn't willing, okay? We're going to learn some stuff. Now this was the manner in former time in Israel concerning redeeming and concerning changing, for to confirm all things. A man plucked off his shoe and gave it to his neighbor, and this was a testimony in Israel. We studied that last week. Therefore the kinsman said unto Boaz, Buy it for thee. So he drew off his shoe. In verse 9, it says, And Boaz said unto the elders and unto all the people, Ye are witnesses this day that I have bought all that was Elimelech's, and all that was Chilion's and Mahlon's of the hand of Naomi. Moreover, Ruth, the Moabitess, the wife of Mahlon, have I purchased to be my wife, to raise up the name of the dead upon his inheritance, that the name of the dead be not cut off from among his brethren, and from the gate of his place. You are witnesses this day. And all the people that were in the gate and the elders said, We are witnesses. The Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house of Israel. And do thou worthily in Ephrath, and be famous in Bethlehem. And let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And when he went into her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name may be famous in Israel. And he shall be unto thee a restorer of thy life, and a nourisher of thine old age. For thy daughter-in-law, which loveth thee, which is better to thee than 7 sons, hath borne him. And Naomi took the child, and laid it in her bosom, and became nurse unto it. And the women, her neighbors, gave it a name, saying, There is a son born to Naomi, and they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now these are the generations of Pharez. Pharez begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram, and Ram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz, and Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. That's a mouthful. Okay, so there's a lot of things here. Okay, this is not what to stay put. There's a lot of things here, like we talked about last week. We may be going, what? But remember, there's cultural differences between us today and then back then. We also talked about last week how inheritances were huge in the Israelite culture. Okay, huge. And if I'm not a fan of stereotypes, but I think we can safely say the Hebrew culture has shown evidence to be very protective of customs, traditions, their language. I mean, it's still being used today in modern day speaking and everyday speaking. Very ancient language, but it's being used today. So I think it's safe to say that inheritance is a super big thing to them, super important. Now, going back, let's go back to talk about verse 1, and we're going to talk through some different things. Now, this one, I actually need you to go to Genesis 23. Why the gate? So the gate was a place of business, the city gate, and they lots of things are settled there actually. And in Genesis 23, we have Abraham and Sarah. They've gotten much, much older, and Sarah dies, but he's in a foreign land and he needs some property to bury her. Where does he go? Look, if you look in 23:18, it's finishing up where it says, unto Abraham for possession in the presence of the children of Heth, before all that went in at the gate of his city. So they did transactions at the city gate. It was also, remember, cities were set up and you could flee to another city. There were different refuge cities and things. So they also use the city gate as a means of monitoring who comes in and out, which is wise, right? You don't just let, anybody in. Little to our president there. You got to protect your borders, and that's not meaning you're going to not let anybody in, but you kind of need, why are you here? What's your business? And what, so on and so forth. So the city gate was super important. So Boaz, being a man of integrity, knew, I'm going to do this at the city gate, first of all, because that's where I probably will find the dude. And second of all, it's above and, it's nothing shady about it. It's out in the open. Okay. So when it says, it's kind of weird for me to pictureize, I guess, because I think city gate, I'm thinking at the very, very border, of a town. And we don't operate that way. In our culture, generally in the town, the business center is downtown, like almost in the center. It's usually the center of the original town when the town started, but now it's like lopsided or something, but we still refer to it as downtown. And so for me, it's kind of weird to think of you going hanging out at the border. I mean, at the gates there, the city limits. They don't mention the name of the king, this relative. And when they say kinsman for him, they mean the word that's just relative, not the one of meaning redeemer. There's several theories out there. I did not take the time to research it, but let me tell you what some of the theories are. Some people say his name's not mentioned because of the inheritance thing, because he did not fulfill the law of redemption or the levirate marriage, because there's like a little bit of both there, and that he had to take off his shoe and give it over, and that's why he's anonymous. Personally, I don't know, and I personally, at this time in my life, I don't want to say never, because I've learned, don't say never. At this time in my life, and when I was doing this study, that wasn't like a thing driving me to go research. To me, it was more focusing on he is being the relative. He's being the relative, and Boaz is being the redeemer. Okay. Now, in verse 2, it says, and he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit ye down, and they sat down. That is, it just seems like a little detail. That's actually quite huge. It again testifies to Boaz's character, that he's going to do things legally and above board, even though generally this was a time that what? Everyone did right, which on their own side. Okay, but he's still holding to, and they must have some semblance of authority and government going on, because they have 10 elders for him to gather. Okay, so they're not totally like chaos, but they do have some semblance there. I just think, again, it just shows his I think Boaz carried quite some weight in his community, and he was respected and regarded as someone to do business with. And I think all of that stemmed from his actions of proving to be full of integrity and honorable, which all stemmed from his obedience to God, his love to God. So when you start with that basic, but sometimes such a struggle for us, basic obeying God, loving God, and honoring God, it branches, it's like roots going out from the rest of your life, and great things grow from it. Doesn't mean you won't always have hard times, but it's just a good root system, a good grounding system. I do wonder, though, when the guy said, yeah, I'll buy it, if he was going, oh man, I wonder if he was thinking, bummer, but he also had another card to throw down. Okay, now in the let me double check one of my references. Now remember, there's so much to the she was a moat from Moab. So this is where I'm going to have you turn to Numbers 25. Why was there such a about, why did God put forth this about the Moabites? Okay, that's because in chapter 25, look at that. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. So the women of Moab back then, now they didn't hold up their heads or anything, but they influenced the Israelites into worshiping fake gods and not honoring Almighty God. So getting into false worship, worshiping a fake God, paganism, all this stuff, more than one time in the Bible, you can see how very serious God takes it. And why shouldn't he? He deserves everything. He deserves all our worship, all our praise. And that's why when my students said, well, how come it's okay for God to be jealous, but not us? I'm like, because he paid for everything. He made everything. He is God. And, who are we to think that? Anyway, so that's why there was such a thing about the Moabites. And the Moabites were not supposed to enter into the congregation of the Israelites. But yet, we're watching the arrangement of a godly Israelite man to a Moabite woman. So that represents something, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I admit, when I was reading verse 3 and it said that, Naomi had some land, I was like, what? Because I was just like picturing her just homeless, basically, destitute and everything. And so I had to do some digging. But now remember, selling back then is not like selling today. We sell our land, our house. We no longer have any rights to it. We never get to go back. Well, you can ask them, can I back? But you can't go back to it. You'd have to 100% buy it back. If you're in this real estate market, good luck. But then it was, excuse me, it was like leasing, more of what we consider a lease. They weren't allowed to totally just sell their inheritance, and the land was their inheritance. And so I don't know if Elimelech just abandoned the property and left it to the next relative, or if he actually leased it to someone. I don't know that. But we do know Naomi had no money, and to redeem the money, she would have had to buy out the rest of the lease, which would probably be extremely expensive. And the only thing that would release her from that would to wait till the year of Jubilee, where all debts were forgiven and everything. But when was that? Was that 18 years from then? Was it 20? Was it 45? Maybe they just had it. Who knows how long it had been. And so who knows how long she was going to have. So this is why Boaz redeeming it for them is so powerful. Boaz is just stepping up to the plate. And I can't help again but think he, of course, was influenced by his love for God, but influenced by the fact that my mom was once the stranger in the land, the lady without a good reputation, and I know what that's like. So I think he was influenced by that. But Naomi was going to have a kinsman redeemer fulfill this for her. And that's why this is why Boaz was such a big deal. And it's kind of interesting. Again, we know nothing happens by chance, She knew of Boaz, but when Boaz noticed Ruth in the field, he had no way to know that, So it's amazing how they brought everything all together. God used all of them to bring them together so that this could happen. And then he's saying, I want you to redeem it if you want to redeem it, but because I would want to buy it. But then the man says, I cannot redeem it for myself. Now, it's really easy to go, well, why wouldn't he do that? Why couldn't he just redeem it for himself? We're not given a whole lot of information about this guy. I saw one theory someone put out there that, well, maybe he was already married. And I thought about that, but I don't know. Because why would God... I can't see a married man being required to fulfill the law of the Levirate marriage, because then that would promote polygamy in some situations, and I know God would never do that. So I'm thinking we will not always know why this guy was saying no. Well, I'm thinking that's exactly it, because like I was saying, the inheritance is big in their culture. It's super big. And they don't want their name to go out of the Israel nation, which is the whole reason why God put forth the Levirate marriage. Do you think it could be issue with the Moabite as well? It could be. It could be. Maybe when he found out, maybe he was single, and maybe the thought of having a Moabite, it could be that. It truly could be. So there's some things here. I mean, all the men here present watching this, obviously they all understand about the law of redemption, and they all understand about the Levirate marriage and everything. And so it's very, we don't know everything, but we can kind of make these assumptions, I think, rather safely. And I'd probably think that because she was from Moab, that guy was like, because notice he was willing to redeem it when he thought it was just land. It was when he heard that he'd have to raise up a child, and it's not going to further Ruth, it's going to further Elimelech's line. So now the taking off the shoe in the Old Testament, well, this is Old Testament, but earlier in the Old Testament actually involves spitting too. The widow could spit in his face and she would take his shoe off. So over the years, I guess this is now become a softer thing, relaxed, but also it wasn't just the shoe thing wasn't just with this. It was also with business transactions sometimes too. And I don't know why. Well, also another thing, Ruth and Naomi are not there to spit in the man's face, that's for sure. But I think it was also just a relaxing of the custom too. Who knows? But the some things we want to know is remember is this is just so different from our culture, and so we might not totally, understand. But I do want you to know that relative, the kinsman, that's just kinsman, not kinsman redeemer, he is like representing the law that Moses gave Moses, and notice that law did not fulfill the redemption, did it? Boaz was the one that fulfilled the redemption, which that's why we say Boaz is symbolic of Jesus Christ, because only Jesus Christ could fulfill our redemption. There's no other person that could fulfill it. And we know that, again, that this is connected to Revelation 5, when the seal's broken and the deed to the earth, and its people is only opened by the Lamb. So he's the only one worthy. In this story, Boaz was the only one worthy. Boaz represents the grace that God gives us, because the law won't save us. That's the whole point of the law, right? To show us that we need God's grace. We cannot do it on our own. They were there also for protection of your heart and relationships, and to keep certain consequences from your life. But there's also the point that without the Holy Spirit, there's no way you can fulfill all these 10 commandments, and there's no way you can do this. You would need the grace of God to be saved. You can't keep up the things all the time. Now, the shoe thing, I think it's interesting. I'm still not sure why that custom started, but we know that started back in, I think it's mentioned in Leviticus. And, but it's interesting, the loosing of the shoe. Moses was told to take his shoes off before the burning bush. And, what's the other one? Joshua and Jericho was commanded to loose thy shoe. And John the Baptist even refers to shoes, but I'm not even fit to tie his shoes. So it's pretty interesting. Okay, so now we've gotten all the way down. So now we're going into 9. So this is this is taking place in front of everybody, and everybody's seeing this. Then we start having these people. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the 10 elders of the city. That came from, I forgot where, but that's what we now call it. They would call a quorum. And there's a Hebrew word that starts with M, Manaya or something. And the services in the synagogue could not take place until there was a quorum there. And so there's significance in that 10 elders of the city. So there's so many things in the Bible. I like that he makes me have to learn, because some things, they're just subtle details because they're subtle details. But some things are like, it's not so subtle. There's a little bit more to it than it looks. And I'm always like, but I like it because it makes me dig more and it makes me search out the answer, which, hey, that's what we're supposed to be doing. Okay, so in the verse, we're going to go 9, 10, 11. It's just talking about, now the people in the gate start telling Boaz stuff, okay? And they say, the Lord make the woman that is come into thine house like Rachel and like Leah, which two did build the house. So it looks like the elders had no problem with Ruth being from Moab. And I think that's because they've already seen a transition take place. They've already seen that she worshiped the one true God that they do. She serves faithfully. She has respect for her elders. She's full of integrity. And so I think that's why they're like, okay, yeah. And that's, it's so nice because remember, Ruth represents us, the Gentile believer, the new church. So it's very nice. But they're like, but then they start saying things you might be going, huh? So like in 12, it says, and let thy house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bare unto Judah, of the seed which the Lord shall give thee of this young woman. So when I was first learning this, I was like, what? Why would you bring up that story? But there's a reason. If you go to Genesis 38, and you start in verse 6, this was the Levirate marriage in action, but done with not true obedience, which led to icky consequences, results, I should say. Okay. So in verse 6, it says, and Judah took a wife for Er his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. And Er, Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. You can hide your sins from everybody else, but you can't hide them from God. Don't mess with God, y'all. He will not be mocked. So verse 8, and Judah said unto Onan, go into thy brother's wife and marry her and raise up seed to thy brother. That's literally the law of levirate marriage right there. Well, and no one knew that the seed should not be his. And it came to pass, when he went into his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, lest that he should give seed to his brother. So he acted like he was obeying God's law, but chose to do things his own way, which we've all done. And we see God takes disobedience really seriously. I mean, look at Moses. He didn't even get to go to the promised land, not because he killed the Egyptian, because he was disobedient. And he did what? He hid it instead of spoke to it. And you'd be like, what? That's a little disobedience. He takes it very seriously. So God's not pleased. So in verse 10, and the thing which he did displease the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Well, then now here's where Judah doesn't man up. Okay. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, okay, remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah, my son, be grown. For he said, lest peradventure he die also, as his brethren did. So God did not say in the levirate marriage, you get to decide which sons and whatever, and this, you can cancel this out if a couple of your sons died. This also tells me that, I don't know, but maybe Judah was oblivious to his son's wickedness, or maybe he didn't want to take the time to deal with it. Sometimes as parents, we see something that's wrong, but we're like, oh, I really don't want to mess with that. I don't know. Anyway, but I do think integrity was an issue with Judah, because first of all, he's not obeying God's law here. Mind you, remember, he was okay with killing Joseph. And then, I will sell him, whatever. So remember, so he's not known for like great moral decisions, but yet the Lord uses his family line. And then in 12, it says, and in the process of time, the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah was comforted and went up into his sheep shearers to Timnath, Timnath, and he and his friend Hera the Hodulamite. Well, Tamar finds out about this, right? And so she goes and dresses like a harlot, or what he assumes will be a harlot, because she put a veil upon her face. And she's on the open place so that he'll see her. And so I'm just going to summarize here. They have relations, and she's like, well, give me something until you send the animal to me for payment. And he gives her the staff, the ring, and the bracelet. And she has a baby from that. And then he finds out through someone else later, oh, your daughter-in-law Tamar has been naughty, and now she's having a baby. And he's like, what? We're going to kill her. And so when she's brought before him, she's like, the father of this child is the man who owns these things. Well, he's like, oops. Okay. So you can disobey God, but don't think you get away with it. And again, like we mentioned last week, I'm not advocating or promoting her choices, but if Judah had done what was right, she would not have been forced to do some things. And maybe, I don't want to say it was wrong for her to do it or not. I just don't know. I personally but also it's a proof that, now don't use this as permission to go out and sin and disobey by any means. But when we make mistakes, God can turn them around into blessings. And they didn't have any more relationship together. That was a one-time thing. And so that led to her actually having twins, and one of them was Pharez. So that's why this is referring there. Let your house be like the house of Pharez. Okay. Now in Genesis, no, I'm in the wrong one. That was not God's way of doing things. So that was an illegitimate son. So that means how many generations are going to need to pass? 10. Okay. 10 generations were going to need to pass before the bloodline could be considered clean, pure. I don't know, okay. So there was a time for redemption of the bloodline, but for a while there's going to be consequences. So they're saying, let your house be like the house of Pharez, whom Tamar bore unto Judah. And here's my take on that. I don't think they're trying to bring up unpleasant history. I don't think so. I think they're saying, hey, because this is basically a levirate marriage and it's the law of redemption, let it be fruitful and blessed like Pharez's family line was blessed. So I don't think it was like a hint to them at all. I think it was just to show that there's a fruition of God's blessings. And I know there's one note I'm forgetting. Let me double check my notes. Yeah. Now, Judah's sons that died because, well, one was wicked and then one did the naughty thing and he died. But Pharez, which would have been their, oddly enough, their half brother, but he actually was not wicked. And he and his sons were mighty men of the tribe of Judah. And First Chronicles 2:10, we find that his descendant Nahshon was the prince of the children of Judah. And Nahshon was the grandfather of Boaz. So it wasn't like they're just sinful, wicked throughout the whole family line. They turned around, and what encouragement that is. Sometimes the sins of the father can bleed into the next generation, but the next generation doesn't have to accept that as their course. They can choose to worship, to be right. We can't help what our ancestors did. If they're wicked or pleasing to the Lord, we can't help that. But we can help what we are. And I find that so many people like to use generational things almost as a cop-out. Forgive me if you get angry, I'm sorry. But sometimes we do. We'll use things as a cop-out. Well, I'm just using one example. Please don't get upset. Alcoholism runs in my family, so I'm probably going to be an alcoholic. That doesn't mean you have to be. You make that choice, okay? You might have a harder struggle. You might have more of a challenge, but God's grace breaks anything generational stuff. We don't have to just be resigned to it. And obviously, Perez chose to go the right way. Maybe Tamara was really good at bringing him up under uh, knowing who God was and God's love, and I don't know. Um, so bleh. Anyway, so that it's interesting. I didn't study this, but this person did study it. It's interesting that Ruth makes a progression. She's a foreigner, and then she becomes a servant. She's out in the fields, and then she becomes like a wife. I mean, it's really neat, because sometimes we think of women in the Old Testament or women in olden times, ancient times, like, oh, they're just doomed. And a lot of them, they didn't have a great life, but there were there were some times that people got blessed, and it was just amazing. We are not great people. Myself, I'm not, but we get blessed with being the bride of Christ, and that's pretty amazing. Because I didn't do anything to deserve it, and it's just amazing. In the Another thing culturally that may throw you off, it may not, is that in verse 16 it says, and Naomi took the child and laid it in her bosom and became nurse unto it. Now, our culture, that means breastfeeding. She's not breastfeeding the child, in case anybody's wondering. Okay, she's old. That's not it. Now, if in some cultures, even today, like in Australia, I was at a homeschool conference in Salt Lake City, and we had the blessing of actually hearing Ken Ham, the ARC guy. We got to hear him speak in person, and it was really fun and really cool. And he was talking about the cultural differences of certain things, and this word was one he brought up because he had a grandchild, and he was holding the baby, because that's all it means is hold the baby. He was holding the baby, and the phone rang, and an American asked, it was on, because he's lived here now for so many years. And they said, what are you doing? He goes, well, I'm just nursing the baby. And the other guy, what? It's like, how's that working out for you? And then Ken's like, oh, I'm holding the baby, So that's all she's doing there. But this is her inheritance. This baby is her inheritance. And she's no longer alone. She's no longer wondering, how am I going to survive? And how do I solve these things? She's got a protector now. She's got a provider now. And we're not alone. We're not alone trying to figure out how we're going to clean up our life, because you can't. Our kinsman redeemer does it for us, just like Boaz cleaned up the things for Naomi. And then it goes into the generations. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez begat Hezron, and Hezron begat Ram, all those. And it's just amazing. I love seeing these genealogies because it shows us, again, just because something started off kind of rocky doesn't mean it's going to end up to be a mess. And my personal life, and again, I'm not advocating, hey, go out and sin, because God's grace is always there. We know we're admonished against that actually in New Testament. But when I was a single mom, and I was a single mom by my own doing, I wasn't Naomi, a widow. I wasn't divorced. I was never married. And I was a single mom. And then that should have been like just horrible consequences. But God turned around and gave me so many blessings. And my son is just a tremendous blessing in our lives. And I can't imagine not having him, So praise God that my family raised me to not think abortion was a solution. And even though I knew I was going to have some answering to do, I also knew I had a support system. A lot of women don't have that. And that's why I like to support things like Let Them Live and some other organizations that will be a support system for women who aren't given good choices. But anyway, he takes things and he blesses. So one thing I do want to read through, because I'm afraid I'll mess it up if I don't read it, the notes. But I want to focus a little bit on the genealogy. Now, we know we're told not to, put stock in genealogies. That means like for your salvation. Okay. But it's okay to study genealogies to get an understanding of God's pattern and God's logical order. I remember I titled this at the beginning, A Pattern of Redemption. And this is, he's just showing us pattern after pattern after pattern. Tamar finally got redeemed from being neglected. And then through her son Pharez, who was not conceived in the best manner, there was big blessings. So in Genesis 46:12, and I think later I'm going to do some more studying on Pharez. I don't know a whole lot about him. So I think later I'm going to go back and do a little more study. But in Genesis 46:12, and the sons of Judah, Er and Onan, remember they're the ones that are wicked and they died, and Shelah and Pharez and Zerah. Zerah was the twin, okay? But Er and Onan died in the land of Canaan, and the sons of Pharez were Hezron and Hamul. So he's listed here as under the Israelites who entered Egypt. And so it's pretty interesting that, and then later we find out that he became the mighty men. So Hezron would have been Pharez's son. So Pharez's son would be, so that would probably make him the first generation to grow up in Egypt. So remember, Judah was the brother of Joseph. So this was not a time when the Israelites had been in Egypt for years and years. In fact, they hadn't gotten there yet. But Joseph encourages them to move to Egypt, right? And they do. But he warned them, don't tell the Pharaoh you're shepherds. Because the Egyptians had a cultural, it was in their culture that was, you're a shepherd. You know, it was very low respect. And then, but they did. It slipped out, or they told him. And then later in years, you know, it was different pharaohs, and Joseph dies, and there's no more influence. And so gradually they're put into submission, made as slaves in captivity. But in this first part, so Pharez would have been, his son would have been growing up in Egypt, probably still under the favor of Joseph's influence. I'm not sure yet. So, but it's, if we, in, I'm just going to read this because I know I will mess it up. So, Pharez has sons, Hezron and Hamul. Hezron was therefore the first generation to grow up in Egypt. Ram is mentioned as his son in 1 Chronicles 2:9. And I don't have that on the ready. 1 Chronicles 2:9 says, oh, of course my fingers don't want to spread the pages apart. The sons also of Hezron that were born unto him, Jerahmeel and Ram and Chelubai. And then, I'm still in 1 Chronicles chapter 2, and then I'm in verse 10. And Ram begat Amminadab, and Amminadab begat Nahshon, the prince of the children of Judah. What? So you're not a lowly dude here. So Pharez's descendants became pretty up there. So it says that Ram begot Amminadab, and Amminadab begot Nahshon, but Amminadab also had a daughter named Elisheba, which was Nahshon's sister, and Elisheba married Moses's brother Aaron. So that's pretty important there, you know. That's like the Kennedys of the Israelites. But I don't like to use them. The Kennedys are not more people. Okay, but anyway, but you know, it's like, woohoo, the bigwigs of the Israelites there. So this made Elisheba, Nahshon's sister, who was a descendant of Pharez. This would have made her very important in the history of the sons of Aaron, who were responsible for the tabernacle and later the temple. Now, Nahshon was the prince of the tribe of Judah, and he was among those who left Egypt under Moses. And his son Salmon entered the promised land under Joshua 40 years later. So cool. And then, of course, he obviously settled in the Bethlehem area. Not only did Salmon participate in the conquest of Canaan, but he may have been, I don't have proof, he may have been one of the spies of the two talked about in Jericho and Joshua 2, which would have been where who comes into play? The spies going into Rahab. Isn't that funny how it all ties together? So great. Either way, Salmon is who married Rahab and who became the father of Boaz. So all of this, it's amazing. Now remember about the 10 generations. Pharez technically was illegitimate son, and bastards were not permitted to enter the congregation of the Lord for 10 generations. So we can count the 10 generations, and this is where I have to check my notes. So it's like Pharez, Hezron, Ram, Amminadab, Nahshon, Salmon, Boaz would be 7, Obed would be 8, Jesse would be 9, David would be 10. And I never connected this, but do you think, is that why God did not allow David to build the temple? He's a man of war, but also he was the 10th one. They needed the 11th generation, which would be Solomon. Okay, so it's really interesting. I love all that stuff. It connects. It's so cool. It's really interesting to me. But again, it's just so much more. There is so much more in Ruth on a topic that I'm not comfortable doing in our Bible study, but maybe I might make a video of it. There are things called codes in the Bible, codes in the Torah. They're not codes to predict the future. They're not like the Da Vinci Code. That's fictional. It's more of, it shows the sovereignty of God and how he wrote his word. And people want to say that men wrote it. There's certain codes put in the Bible that prove only God could have put those together, because you're talking about not even our English, but it's back in that language. And remember, Hebrews read from right to left, which is opposite of us. And in the book of Ruth, when they would count every 49 letters, it started spelling out things. Like the first name they would get after 48 letters would be Boaz, and then Ruth. And so some people are not comfortable with that topic, so I didn't want to spend time on it here. And the bottom line is, it's not used for you to have some kind of divining information. That's not for our place, but it is to prove that without a doubt, this was a divine designer, author of this Bible, and it is not written by men. It is penned by men. He used men, but it's his word, and it's sovereign. There's no mistakes in it, and it doesn't contradict itself. And yet we're told in the world today that, we hear all those things. It was translated wrong. It was not translated wrong. It has been kept pure. If he's going to go through the bother of writing his word out for us, he's going to preserve it. And if he's going to bother to have such order and organization in it that you can find codes in it, he's going to protect it. And he did. So I just love the book of Ruth. Now, I got more out of it than I thought. I'll be honest with you. I was like, oh, everybody does the book of Ruth. But I actually got more out of it than I thought. Praise the Lord. Thank you for making me be accountable, you guys, and having to study it. And again, it does connect to Revelation 5, and that God, Jesus, is our kinsman redeemer. He is our kinsman redeemer. All right. So, like I said, next week, for you online folks, I don't know if you heard it, Lord willing, we will do the Age of Deceit. That is just a 1-week study. It's just a topical study. And then after that, we will start in Romans.
And again, you don't need a workbook, so anybody can join if you want to invite someone to join. They also aren't, you know, sold. I mean, they're not like, in stone that they have to be in this every Wednesday night. I So just anybody can drop in. All right, so I'm going to sign off with the online people.